Here is the United States. Here is the United States. Wait a second. Here is the United States. Here is the United States. Now, this is a video that mostly is under the assumption that you've already lived in the United States for a while, but it could be used if you're like planning to enter the United States. It's just kind of not going to be informative about the United States as a whole of what you can expect when you're here. But I want to show here kind of where you might want to move to if you're unsatisfied with where you currently live. So I've came up with a couple broad ideas for how I could determine what the best place to live is. And it's not like I'm going to have one answer, but I'm just going to show a couple zones, basically, of what you can kind of expect, sort of. So, first I want to make the lines for the time zones. I'm already messing up. But like the reason why I want to show these time zones is because, you know, not everybody thinks about them. They're kind of important depending on a lot of random stuff, honestly. Like, for the most part, you'll like never think about them, but you'd be surprised how major they can affect. Let's say, you know, if you're a sports fan, then it can majorly affect when you're going to be watching sports. Trying to think what else. Honestly, you kind of never know. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. And these aren't exactly precise lines here. Sorry, but I just kind of want to just have this here as just a general idea. Just kind of weird because like some of these are kind of not what you'd expect. Like apparently this is like that. It's something like this though. Again, this isn't like one of the more important details. But so we got the eastern coast here. In fact, we'll just do this. So we got east, we got west or Pacific or whatever it's called, and then we got these two in the middle because I don't know, mountain. I think mountain time zone, and I don't know what this one is. Central? No, actually, in fact, this isn't even east. It's central. I don't know why, because this isn't the center of the country, but maybe it has to do with, I don't know. I have no idea. But I'm not. This isn't a history lesson on why these are named this way, so don't worry about it. Let's X this one out even more. I can't believe it's not Eastern. Unless I'm wrong, and it is Eastern. We'll keep this in. You know what? This is what we're doing. I don't care if I'm wrong. This isn't a major part. I did not plan this part too much. So anyway, there you go. There's the time zones. Now we're going to go over, and this is the temperature of the regions, just in general. Obviously, this isn't yearly or anything like that, but we can just assume that if you live, let's generally say if you live about here, kind of dip down a little. You know, it can change a little bit, but I think that this is a pretty good measure. I've actually been to many states, you know, like I've been to South Carolina, Florida, a few of the southern states for a while, and I mean, I don't think you need to go to Texas to know it's hot. I've been to Arizona, California. In general, California is not that bad. You know, you could definitely drop temperatures that are on here by like, yeah, you know, like Los Angeles. Like, okay, you got some like mid 80s to high 90s here, but like for Los Angeles and some of these coastal cities, you could probably drop it by 10 degrees, maybe more. LA is especially bizarre in this way, so maybe LA is not the best way to show it. But like New Orleans, it's in one of the more humid areas, so that's why that's hot. This is more desert areas. Orlando and that area, again, there's the Everglades, so it's very humid there. So basically, you can just assume that if you are, let's say, here-ish, you're going to be humid heat. That's fine. You know, I hate humid heat, but you know, some people really like it. And then here is where you get your dry heat. And I don't know, we'll just do it like this. It's just very dry heat. I think weather's like one of the most important parts when you're deciding where to live. I know that might sound like kind of silly, but like you'd be surprised how, like, for instance, these areas over here are very wet. So if you like love rain, this is the place to go. Like really great rain areas there. Maine, all known about its rain. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's other areas that have major rain areas, but you know, I just wanted to kind of highlight those a little bit. And then like pretty much you can assume that if you're above that red line, you have some pretty good amount of snow and just a good variety of pretty decently hot summers and pretty intense winters. We'll make a real quick like line here for the winters. I believe we'll look at this map again. We'll go with I've seen like a few other maps, so I'll just kind of guesstimate on this one. It's about, let's say, kind of like this when it comes to winter. I think this line feels about right. I'm not actually sure when it comes to Seattle. You never hear about really intense bad winters in Seattle, but I'll just assume it is. You know, these are more to do with latitude lines than anything. So I think that this line is like, if you're above there, you're going to have some hell as far as winters go. Now, this might make you think, oh, well, then you go between them, right? Because it's nice in the middle. It's like, well, actually, it's kind of the most hellish area in the middle because you get the worst of both worlds. Like you could get some really intense summers and really intense winters. It really just depends on the year, but like, sheesh. If you just want consistency all year round, the south is kind of where to go, and the north, I mean, it gets like, you know, the north, I don't think it's gonna stay cold year round, but let's say going above hundreds, I'm pretty sure that almost never happens above that blue line, pretty much. So there are hot days in New York. Let's get away from this idea anyway. But you get what I mean. You know, weather, it's kind of vague, but you know, in general, this is a good way to do it. I know this is a very imprecise and not, you know, not inspirationally drawn, but you know. So now we have this is I believe the living wage requirements. Now this is kind of bizarre because it shows living wage requirements in California and New York as being 30,000. I'll just assume that the major cities are raising this amount. Like, it's going to be more than 30,000 probably, but more importantly, like, the big cities are raising this amount more than you would expect. Like, you can definitely go to plenty of places in New York and California and live probably just fine at 25,000. Because remember, these are like minimum requirements, more or less. But I think it's still like a really good one to go by. So for this one, we'll just make like, we'll put some purples. we'll use some purples. Like, we'll still go based on this, but like, you know, we're gonna like circle the major cities, right? You can even see it on this map. It's like if it's got bright yellow, major city. And to be fair, that just means it's a major city. It doesn't really mean that it's gonna have like high living expenses. That's where like state level governments are going to highly affect this. And that's where like, okay, well, I've at least heard that New York and California have high living expenses just based on like tax requirements, basically, what they expect from just normal people to pay on taxes. And there's other stuff too. You know, I say taxes, you know, and that might mean income tax, but we also are apparently talking about gas prices. I went to California recently, and I was shocked to learn that California gas prices were around, oh, what was it? I think it was about $3.50. I mean, they've been higher, they've been lower, you know. It's always changing nowadays. But in, let's say, Ohio, I believe it was right around $2. And yeah, again, California like $2.50. And I pretty much just picked Ohio because it was one of the lower numbers in the country. It's not the lowest, but you know, it's right around of what you could expect as being the lowest. So going by this, we'll do this thing a little. Now there's a few other places we'll mark right here real quick, but you know, like, why is it that all these states on the East Coast are way higher living wages? Well, I would assume that this is a desire to live on the coast related type of thing. But it is also interesting how Maine and, I don't remember which one's Delaware and which one's Vermont, but you know, one of these is higher than the other. I don't know why. But you know, I guess you can just assume if you're on the coast and you're on a big city, you're kind of screwing yourself over in that way. Obviously, if you have a good job, basically, you know, I say job, but like I more mean like experience. You know, if you've been at some decent company for like 5 years, you can pretty much move anywhere. And you know, it depends what your profession is, because something else I wanted to talk about a little bit is the variety of the jobs you can find. Like, I would say basically most of the country is like the same. I'm not even going to mark this with color because it's kind of weird, because most of the country, it's like, okay, you can get a factory job, you can get some office jobs in some major cities. You know, out in the farmland areas, like, you find plenty of factories, and you know, there's the local store type stuff for automotive places or welding places. But basically, you can kind of view it as everything in like probably 90% of the country is like normal job market, basically. But then there's places like New York and LA that have a little bit higher concentration of the arts. You know, whether you're talking about video games or actual art, or maybe a high desire for like architecture type of stuff, maybe. There's all types of stuff in that way. Also, there's more desire for newspapers in these cities as well. You know, and to be fair, you could say that that's true in most major cities. Every state has a major city, at least one, mostly. And in general, you can just assume that there are arts everywhere, just not as plentiful as, again, like Seattle, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. And I'm also like, aware that like there's a few cities, I think like Houston or Dallas and maybe Atlanta, that are also kind of slowly getting bigger in the arts and art professions that arts can do, but artists can do. But in general, I think that this is like the most major cities where it's heavily affecting what you can do. Now, when it comes to, let's just show this political map. It's not too important, but considering how few blue states, everything, you can kind of just assume that, I don't know, everywhere's 40% to 40% ish as far as political parties go, and then like 10-20% independence, something like that. But we'll mark the biggest blue states that like these blue states will like never change at all. We'll just mark those with like some blue square. Just because it is like a little bit interesting to note that these are some of the higher living expenses states. I'd probably say that these four states are probably the biggest blue states, like biggest by like a pretty large margin, I'd say. I mean, Virginia's pretty major too, but we'll mark some of those other ones next to New York, I think, because I think that is Massachusetts really that blue though? I guess so. Sure, we'll mark Massachusetts. I'm not gonna do the same for. I'm not even gonna bother with red states, just because red states are kind of. You just kind of never know how die-hard they are, because like for instance, it says on here that Ohio is a red state, but I know for a fact that they are almost completely split. Like they have a Democrat governor, and they voted for Obama in 2008. Now I know that these political affiliations kind of go up and down because you could even be like, well, Michigan won in 2016. They voted red, but this is again, this is just based on history. I don't know how much history, but in general, you can kind of get a good idea of some of these states. Like, it's kind of weird. Like Montana, I would say that's far more Democrat. But that's why I'm just like not really gonna mark red and blue, because it's like the only true red states would probably be like the South right here, and Texas probably. But like Texas's population is growing quite a bit, so you never know how that will change in like 5 years, 10 years even. Like, so that's just like way too hard to tell. But like, I guess there's like Colorado. You could probably call Colorado like a for sure blue state. So we'll mark Colorado there. But I suppose it's mostly because of Denver. That's just a guess. But not too important. But it is like worth noting that like the biggest cities in the country are in these blue states. Like I don't really talk about Washington D.C. much, but I think Washington D.C. is fairly blue. But I've also heard that a lot of people commute to Virginia or Pennsylvania to go to Washington D.C. So I think that also throws off the numbers a bit. So the next one we have here is a little bit unorthodox, but this is interesting because what we have right here is the chances of hitting a deer. You might think this isn't very important, but you know, when you see pictures like this, and I mean, you might think that no, like hardly anybody ever hits deers. It's like, well, it depends where you live. Yeah, if you commute to the city all the time, you probably don't have to worry about them. But I've heard plenty of horror stories in Pennsylvania about how you're gonna get hit. You're gonna hit a deer almost all the time, partly because the roads are so squirrely, and by that I mean like they curve a lot, and you're in the middle of the woods a lot. So as you can kind of see here, you could basically just say that if it's in dark gray here, then you're way more likely to hit some deer. And then, you know, it goes on from there. I don't know how we can quite mark these, but we'll go with a dark gray for the worst states, and then light gray for the fine states. So we got here like so it goes here to there to there. Yeah, like there's no way that Texas is that bad. You know, and I'm only going with deer because those are the most likely ones to for a card hit and damage the car. And again, this is mostly for more of a consideration if you're out of the city, because like I think too many people just assume I'm gonna live in a big city. It's like, well, if you're gonna live in a big city, that doesn't mean you're gonna live in it. It means you're gonna live around it. So it's a little too vague about how dangerous things would get. Like, for instance, like okay, so you see Tennessee and Illinois here, right? You know, why is it that they are one of the two kind of island states that seem to not have as many deer hitting? Now, it could have something to do with the fact that the deer population got killed down years and years ago. It could have to do with the roads being straighter and there's being less trees in these areas. Though I've been to Tennessee and I know they have plenty of trees. But I would say it has more to do with how much of a commute there is. I think that when it comes to Chicago, there are a lot of people commuting into the city, but they've chased away so much of the deer population that the deer stay very far away from this area. And so basically it's all but killed their population in Chicago. Now, when it comes to outside Chicago, it might be kind of bad, but again, there's not many major cities in Illinois. There's only about, I suppose that you could say St. Louis is kind of in sort of Illinois, and there's also Springfield, I believe, in Illinois, and maybe Des Moines. Yes, Des Moines. Yes. So I suppose those would be major cities that you would be hitting deer in. And so part of it is how many major cities are in your state, how much of a commute you're going to have to get to go to work in that city, and how much the deer population has been reduced in years past, or whether deer are even indigenous to that area. Like, I would have to assume that California is that way because deer just aren't indigenous to that area. That's just my guess. Just because there's quite a lot of forested areas in California, and yet it has less of a likelihood to have deer hittings than Nevada. Nevada is basically a desert. How are you more likely to hit a deer in Nevada, a desert, than in California? I would have to just assume, again, it's all about deer population. I think that's kind of enough to say on that. I know that we talked a lot about deer populations, but you'd be surprised how hitting animals and having animal problems, like there's so many animals that you could talk about. You know, like you talk about how Arizona and New Mexico and Texas, and they have like scorpions, a lot of scorpions, or maybe bigger spiders. Though I've heard plenty about there being quite big spiders in the South also. And of course, you have all the exotic creatures that go wild in Florida. You know, boa constrictors in California and alligators. But you know, in general, we're talking about damages to vehicles. We're not going to talk about deaths to these animals. Those are so uncommon that it's not really worth thinking about, except perhaps for scorpions. Scorpions are a little bit questionable. The fact that like Arizona has such a giant scorpion problem even in the cities is kind of unnerving. But don't worry about it too much. Just make sure you check your shoes. So based on what we've seen there, we got this mismatch of stuff. Now, when it comes to where you would want to live here. Now, personally, I don't like the heat at all. But you'd be surprised how awful really bad snowy roads are. So that's why I'm more likely to be in, or be, I should say, more likely to move to an area in this central location. But yeah, again, I don't particularly think the California definitely is just like, again, like it's like a different country with how bad the pricing is. Same thing with like what East Coast. I'd almost want to live in Washington D.C. and Virginia area, but again, prices are pretty high. Now you get to like something like West Virginia, and I'm actually very interested in it. But it is basically a state built on coal mining in a time when coal mining is still dying or dead, you know, or maybe most of it was mined out of West Virginia. Either way, it's worth looking into, but that's about all I can say. Now when it comes to Kentucky, it's not much different than West Virginia. The only difference is, I suppose, just it depends on the major cities you're interested in. So then you get to, let's just skip over to like the Great Plains area. We'll just mark the Great Plains right here with a big ol' oval. Great Plains area, not really counting Colorado, but yeah, the Great Plains area. If you're not in the city, I think you're in trouble because even small towns in Great Plains area are smaller than most other states' standards. Like, you might live in a small town in Illinois, and it's like, oh, what? Things aren't too bad. I'd live here for all my life. It'd be fine. Well, in the Great Plains, like, nobody's going to be moving there, pretty much. And you're even more limited in what you might find. Like, right now, let's say, the nearest Walmart is 20 miles away, period. That's probably not that bad, all things considered, compared to some other places. But, like, it might be an hour, maybe longer away in the Great Plains. And, you know, like, why are we judging based on Walmart? Well, it's like, well, you can always find a store to go and get groceries at, probably pretty close by. But when it comes to like getting a wider variety of ingredients, I would say that Walmart is the absolute minimum of what you should be able to find and restock yourself, and maybe even, you know, find decorations for where you're living at. Now, if we're talking about, let's say, the housing market type of stuff, obviously, like, again, the minimum income requirement for these states, that's kind of what it's based on to some extent. That's probably why it's more concentrated on the coast. Now, I guess Texas coast is just not desire too much. And of course, the Louisiana coast, nowadays. Yeah. So, I would say the hot spots of where people want to live right now would probably be, we're gonna say, I've heard big things in the Texas area. Big things. Need to look into it more. Honestly, it's kind of a complex thing because what are you gonna work there as and stuff like that. Because if all you're gonna do is just go and work at a local store, or work on a highway or something, or be a cop, it kind of doesn't matter too much where you're gonna go. Like you can probably just go 1 or 2 states over and it'll be like a different world pretty much. But I've just heard that there's a lot of job variety in this area in Texas. Kind of the same thing with Seattle. No matter how liberal it is, it's not exactly a 100% liberal area. So there's a good variety of factories that you can go to there. I suppose the biggest thing that being in a liberal state would affect you would be in how, again, like I think gas prices might be higher in California because it has to do with being eco-friendly. And I don't know exactly how that affects every state, but again, we're just showing off some hotspot areas. I remember Seattle. I remember Texas. Big time areas. I honestly don't know much else. Oh yeah, that's right. I did hear about Atlanta. I don't know why. I think it might have something to do with the major corporations maybe moving there more. That's my guess, at least. Denver, I know, used to be a pretty major location, but I don't think it's that big in recent years. Well, I'll make a small one. I'll make a small one here in Salt Lake. I've heard in past years that it was a big deal. I don't know about now. That's a little questionable. But anyway, back to my original discussion about things. Nevada, mostly desert. So if you're gonna want to work at a casino or tourist type businesses, this would be a great location because Las Vegas and Reno, probably the biggest gambling locations in the world. This is definitely information based on decades old ideas, but I'm still gonna say it. And so again, when it comes to like temperatures, if you don't mind the cold, if you don't mind driving through the cold, which I'd like to emphasize that can be like quite a significant problem. Not to mention all the cold damages that can happen to your house, whether it be related to power lines being held up, being dropped down because of ice, or whether it be, again, how bad roads are. Oh, I can't go to work today because roads are just that full of ice and stuff. Again, I don't really hear that much problem in Seattle, so my guess is just that it's close enough to the coast that the snow is mitigated at least a little bit. But that said, I've heard some really bad winters happen in New York, and that's right on the coast, so obviously every location's very different. But again, I'd say if you want to move somewhere, move to a major city that has low living expenses. Now, what kind of city would that be? I don't know. Well, we got here, I would say Des Moines is pretty major. It's got really major hospitals there. I would say that it's a pretty well-off city, all things considered. Another one I'll just mention is the Twin Cities. I think it's right here. And the Twin Cities is definitely a desirable place to be, but again, winters are probably the worst it possibly could be. That's kind of why I think Atlanta is like such a big deal. I know in years past they've kind of been known for poor crime, or high crime, I should say. But there's gonna be high crime pretty much everywhere. I don't think anywhere is particularly bad with crime right now, other than Chicago and DC. I don't know about San Francisco. I think with hearing bad things at one point, maybe just because Oakland was so bad or something. But again, high living expenses there anyway. So let's see what else we got here. I think like Oklahoma City is at least worth looking into, maybe, though that might have a high crime rate. But again, I think that all these cities, because like we're talking about right here, like San Antonio, Houston, Dallas. One that I'm sure is covered up and I'm forgetting about. It's the one next to Dallas. Although I thought that was Houston. So. No, Houston's down here. Sorry, I'm crazy. Yeah, Houston down here, San Antonio here, Dallas up here. Fort Worth is next to Dallas. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Or perhaps it's Arlington, maybe. As for these areas, honestly, even the biggest cities in West Virginia and Tennessee aren't even worth thinking about. But I mean, maybe Louisville is pretty big in Kentucky. Cincinnati's pretty big. Yeah, like pretty much cities like along the Ohio River, I suppose, are kind of doing fairly well. But like, see, like for instance, St. Louis, I remember that being a very desirable location to live in for a while. But in recent years, I heard it's getting really, really bad. I think I did hear that it has pretty bad crime there. And more importantly, I've heard that there's a lot of businesses that no longer want to move over there. I've heard good things about Columbus. I know that might be shocking, but I've heard it's become a very desirable location for a lot of corporations. It's got a lot of nice neighborhood type stuff. It's a really well put together city overall. And even if Detroit has kind of fallen in recent years, I'm still going to mark Detroit as being fairly significant as a location to move to, for sure. I've also definitely heard some big things about Phoenix. Obviously, the hot weather is a problem, but I've heard that it's worth it to go there even if there are problems with the hot weather. So, who knows? That's definitely one that is worth looking into, at least. Especially if you like hot weather. Let's say you just really, really love hot weather. I don't think Florida's worth going to at all. I've only heard bad things, like horror stories about Florida, about the crime rates, about the how finding jobs can be a bit of a problem. I suppose the only other locations I can think would be worth mentioning would be maybe Myrtle Beach, I believe, somewhere around that area, or maybe it's Richmond, somewhere between those two, I suppose. I heard they're doing pretty well. I don't think the cost of living is that bad, but as long as you stay away from Washington, D.C., it's probably better. But we'll also maybe mark Pittsburgh? I don't know. No, I don't know enough about Pittsburgh. But I think in general this is a good map. This is a good random crap mess of stuff that I'm showing off here. So yeah, and also I know I marked Hawaii. Hawaii is basically just tourist destination. If you're interested in doing touristy type stuff, Hawaii is definitely always good. When it comes to living there, they are very limited on space, so it can be a bit of a problem in that way. But if we're talking about like limited living space, I think Hawaii is pretty much the only one, though perhaps LA might have that issue a little bit too, maybe. You know, it's quite impossible to learn everything that you possibly can about all these locations. You kind of have to go based on hearsay a little bit, and that's kind of why it's like looking into just pure numbers and again stuff like how the weather is in these areas. I think that it's more significant than some people will give credit for. Because, I mean, I've worked at a couple locations with 40-hour-a-week jobs. And how bad a commute is can really affect how much you like a job. You'd be very surprised. In some ways, I kind of view this video as being something for like mid-20-year-olds that are looking for a better place to live, or they just are leaving college and they already know that they want to get out of their state. But like when it comes to people from out of the country coming to this country here, I think it's worth thinking about the differences between each state, because each state, I honestly believe, is as different as a different country. Some of them are perhaps a little too similar to each other, but it's mostly like states right next to each other. Again, like Mississippi, Alabama, maybe, or something like that. Just similar in its environment, similar in its ideas. But again, you'd be surprised how you could go, again, like from Kansas to even Illinois, practically polar opposite in how things might be viewed. Or even Kansas to Colorado, things can be very, very significant in how things can be viewed, whether it's politically or just when it comes to what a company wants to get out of its workers. I could go on and on, but I just want to show that these ideas I've shown here are definitely worth your time to consider if you ever want to go to a different location. And of course, like Wyoming's not like a bad state or anything, really. It's just, it depends on what your work is. If you're a geologist, then being in Wyoming might be a dream come true. But if you're a doctor, then Wyoming would be a big problem. Now, if we're only talking about factories, I'd say weather is the most important thing. So you see how, some people definitely have to think about the issues of where they're living way more than others. And of course, then on top of that, there's the quality of education in each state can very wildly, drastically change. So, there's that to consider if you have children as well. Thanks for watching my video. Please support me at Patreon. It's in the description. Watch me on Twitch if you care. And thanks for watching. See ya.